So welcome back to the Kirklees Democracy Commission for the second evidence session that we're taking today. We're very fortunate to be joined by Nick Booth, who set up Podnosh in 2005, has been an instrumental player in looking at how local democracy and democracy more widely, how questions of digital democracy and other issues and questions about how we increase citizen participation and that connection with government more widely. And in that way, we're very pleased to come and join us today because the Kirklees Democracy Commission has been set up in many ways to respond to some of the constitutional shifts of architecture across the United Kingdom, particularly in England over the last couple of years, the emergence of regional devolution, and also the repercussions of the European Union referendum, this very unique moment we seem to be in. Society seems energised and politicised in ways which, in my sort of living memory, I cannot remember. One of the issues which is sort of left out in many of these debates has been its impact on local governance and local democracy, and Kirklees Council, I think, should be congratulated for having the foresight and the commitment to holding this commission and asking the questions that Whitehall and Westminster have in the main overlooked. And the remit of the commission is to look at the role of elected councillors and of election cycles and that process of participation in that context. Also the role of councillors and the changing role within the paradigm of a representative and participative democracy. And more than that, how do the council and councillors more effectively engage with citizens, with business, with communities, using social media and new emerging forms of participation to supplement more established ways. And in that sense, your appearance here today is genuinely appreciated, and we're very grateful for your time. I'd like to introduce my two fellow councillors with me today.
Andrew Cook, member of the Commission.
Andrew Paulson.
And one of the most rewarding things about the Kirklees Democracy Commission has been that the four parties represented within the council have all bought into this process and have given it their support, and I think it gives it a sense of political legitimacy which gives it a richness. So far we've undertaken engagement with local citizens, and over the last month or so we've been holding a number of stakeholder inquiries where we've been taking evidence from a wide range of different stakeholders. And many of the questions that we're going to talk about today have been come out from different angles and different ways, and we're very much looking forward to getting your perspective on this. Just to sort of open up the first sort of area we want to really explore is this relationship between the citizen and the council, and it clearly is changing both in terms of that nature of representation and participation, but just also in the context of the impact of austerity, the way in which councils are functioning now, and the change in which public service delivery has been made. It's often identified as a problematic relationship for many reasons, and I just wonder whether you have any initial thoughts on why that might be a more complex, problematic relationship than it has been in previous times, and also how could that relationship be made better? How can we improve that relationship?
Okay, that's quite a big question.
It is a big question. It is a very
that's what we're here for. So I mean, we actually talked at Not Westminster a while ago, and I was in a room with a number of councillors, and one thing that they said fairly consistently was that they do not feel that they're in a position to lead in any sort of policy or moral or ethical way, because they are so absorbed into the council's management process that essentially they are a channel for people's problems, which they then use their whatever wherewithal they have to either try and fix, or to say to those people, I'm sorry, the council can't sort that out, but go somewhere else. And so we particularly as services have reduced, the availability of services have reduced, budgets have reduced, I genuinely think that councillors can easily end up completely stuck in this sort of like in-between role where they are just almost a super officer with sort of apparently extra levels of authority, but nothing much more than that. My view about that is that if councillors allow themselves to stay stuck in that position, then who is actually understanding the communities, championing the communities, who is actually representing the community through anything other than a sort of representing it through how people experience increasingly poor or increasingly frustrated levels of service delivery. So the relationship between the citizen and the councillor is partly, I think, partly the councillor and the council, and to a certain extent the citizens, but need to unlock themselves from that position. They need to find a way to actually be in and about the community, understanding who's doing what, recognising people for the things they're accomplishing, appreciating what's going on, connecting people up, linking people, and starting to develop the places that they serve as sort of network places, as platforms, rather than simply channels that bring problems or service demands through their surgery, through their email address, through whatever other council mechanisms that the council can or can't deal with. And I think that as money has dwindled and as our expectations of local authorities haven't really changed to match that, I'm quite sure that a lot of councillors are stuck in an almost impossible position.
And that position is partially due to tradition, possibly,
Yeah.
and sort of learned behaviour, and partly due to the institutional frameworks in which they operate.
Yeah. And also I think it's partly to do with, so part of the tradition is to do with the sort of traditions of electioneering as well, sort of being seen to fix things for certain people, being seen next to something that they have made happen or whatever, which is, and I think that those traditions are based on sort of leafleting, they're based on hoping to get into newspapers, they're based on quite old-fashioned understandings of the way people consume media. And actually the way in which people use social media to build networks and accomplish things is often through what I call loops of generosity. So it is about supporting each other and about being sharing each other's stuff, being kind, considerate and interested in other people rather than requiring other people to be interested in them. And that is a very different culture from the traditional electioneering culture. It doesn't mean that I don't think councillors are like that or can do that, but I think that the model of behaviour is quite
Our political
old-fashioned.
culture, the way we do party politics in elections. I think it's an interesting point that hasn't really been raised, actually, the way in which that is presented, the indicators of success or otherwise.
Or the way you attack other politicians, you know, the classic sort of pointing at a pothole in a road is, you know, which we all laugh at and get satirised, but it's part of that reflex of habits that councillors particularly would do very well to start relaxing and start developing new habits. I also think it's true to a certain extent of council officers. Now, they don't quite point at potholes, but they do behave in very traditional, structured ways, which is about channeling towards services, rather than building networks, building platforms, building trust, connecting people up, and then sort of like nurturing what grows out of that.
Do you think that the election cycles, and one of the things we're looking at here is the frequency of elections, it's a 3 and 4 year model, do you think that that sort of it shapes the mindset of councils and the way they interact with citizens in terms of success, impact, in other ways? The more frequently they have to go to the electorate, the more it keeps reinforcing this sort of mode of thinking.
Yeah, well, it definitely does. You see it in places where I've worked and stuff. I mean, I used to work for the BBC as a local government specialist, so I covered loads of local elections. But it depends on how secure you feel you are, as to whether you feel you've got that you can play the long game in your ward or not. But where there's a ward where you're constantly competing, you're always going to be spending 10 weeks, 12 weeks of the year helping your colleague get re-elected, even if you're not up for re-election yourself. And there's that blessed 2 years where you sort of think, what can we do with this? And actually that's only 18 months really by the time you've sorted a whole bunch of other stuff out. And also I don't know, some residents are clued into who their councillors are, some residents are clued into the electoral cycle and why it happens that way, but it is just a little bit confusing, and it makes it very difficult for you to make long-term choices as a politician, I think.
That strategic thinking approach.
And you know, we're not talking about a big ambition here. Strategic being 4 years as opposed to 9-10 months. And it's not as bad as I'm slightly over egging it, I think. But
No, that's
So I'm not convinced that an election every year, even as a political reporter, it used to bore me.
Yeah.
So what it does for the electorate, I do not know.
Interesting point. Andrew.
I've been picturing the vicinity of potholes.
Really? Were you?
Yeah, I didn't put that because that would make me a Liberal Democrat.
Other parties are available.
Oh yeah. But I think the point I would make is that often when we're in that electoral cycle of things, we can be taken down that road of dealing with individual local problems, which is perfectly legitimate. But what it doesn't do is say, I have got a 4-year vision for running Kirklees Council. I've got a view about how that can be run, and I want you to buy into my vision, whether I'm from the Green Party, the Conservative Party, or whatever. And so what I'd be interested in is to know about any awareness you have of places, because not all councils are the same. We are this West Yorkshire model. I think Doncaster's now gone to sort of 4 yearly, hasn't it? There's various other places around the country which have elections every 4 years. So I'm just wondering if the political parties approach things differently in those sort of areas. In your experience, have you come across a different approach?
I wouldn't say I've got a huge amount of experience. I mean, a lot of the county councils are in 4-year cycles.
But they have districts as well.
Yeah, but they then they still have elections going on within that council. I think the trouble is that the actual difference of the culture is often to do whether we are in coalition, whether we've got a strong majority one way or the other. But I just think that because the other thing about always being on the verge of being judged or your colleague being judged is you're probably also more conscious about mistakes. You feel less able to make them, less able to experiment, less able to explore. But going back to the point I was trying to make at the beginning, I think is I genuinely think that healthier communities are those that know themselves reasonably well, are well connected, and it takes time and patience and a certain amount of confidence to build those connections. And if you know that you've got a good few years, you can spend time on relationships, you can spend time on the odd quick win, but knowing that you're spending a couple of years connecting people up, understanding, supporting, before you have to come up with something that might look okay on a leaflet.
Yeah.
That's fine in isolation. However, the landscape is always changing. For example, we plan ahead 4 years, but who knows what's going to happen with devolution?
Yeah.
And how the role of the council and the role of the council is going to change. And the second part is when people vote in local elections, they're not necessarily voting on local issues. National issues really do.
Indeed.
And we're very conscious that whatever campaign we can run locally, if somebody says one thing out of turn at Westminster, it's scuppered.
Yeah.
Not much of a problem for me.
I don't.
No. So again, if we thinking about devolution, devolution looks to me like somebody going, oh dear, we got rid of the regional development agencies. We need something a bit like that, but it can't be that. So let's put a fig leaf of democracy on it and crack on.
Love it.
And I suspect that it's not going to rapidly get much more democratic than that. So, it's essentially a committee of senior politicians from different districts plus a mayor, and that is going to be a very political thing around big money. Where does the big money go? And that's sort of in devolution, they may feel that they want to really understand what the wider region, people in the wider region want, but in the end, it's going to be a political bun fight amongst essentially the leaders of the different districts. So I think that hoping that will change, hoping that will become a much more sort of vibrant, connected form of democracy is probably a bit naive and a bit wishful thinking, and you can put a lot of emotional energy into that and get nowhere. So the thing that I think, again, going back to this business of, and this is also true of how people use the internet, but going back to this business of being people in places that actively connect people up, actively grow the civic conversation where you are, starts to change the sort of civic relationships within your wards, within your district, and starts to change the confidence with which you might be able to feel that you really can speak for people when you end up on a big stage, like a relatively medium-sized stage, like the devolution. So you're absolutely right, things will change, things will be messy, they'll rarely be what you wish them to be, but the one thing you can do is try and disconnect yourself from being a simple service delivery servant of, and try and find the space and the relationships and the connections and the time and the generosity, and I'm not suggesting you don't have that, to really connect up the places you serve. And I think that gives that can potentially change the way you might do politics. It can change things electorally a bit for you as well. But it just gives you a bedrock of, I am not a slave to these odd cycles that I cannot control, because people know me, I know people, and I'm not suggesting that you're not already doing some of that, but I think that is the way you can influence things.
It's sort of that sort of role that you describe is one which is a shift away from the traditional representative role that we understand, the Victorian model possibly of local councillor, towards something which acknowledges that there is quite clearly a participative democracy within wards which they need to be interacting with, engaging with. To what extent do you think that necessitates a change in how councillors see their role within their wards and within local authorities more widely?
I think quite substantially. The simple fact is that if councils keep using the traditional models, so let's say this is a caricature of the traditional model. Somebody who's particularly arrogant says, "Well, I got elected, so what I think is what matters." I don't need to talk to them until the election, and my job is to be on committees, is to be making speeches, is to go to London and do that sort of stuff, and to voice my opinions and do my voting. That these days is stupendously easy for us to just ignore. You'd be doing it in a completely isolated bubble. The local papers don't have the time, energy and effort to be there to see you doing that. The BBC is about to spend some money trying to improve that a little bit, which is potentially a good thing. But also when you're on Facebook and you can either look at a politician standing there pontificating, or you can look at the pictures of your cousin's wedding, or you can look at a picture of a kitten. You've lost. You've absolutely lost. So just doing that in isolation means that you're just going to continue to, the piles of agendas won't be piles because they'll be digital, but aside from that, you will just be feeding the machine of decision making. Not that those decisions don't necessarily need to be made. The other thing that also isolates you is that people can use the internet particularly to get to know each other, to find each other, shared interests, shared space, to start doing things together, to collaborate. So that's what people are using the internet for, to start creating civic good, irrespective of what the local authority is doing. So that's why it's time for active citizens who are involved in local government, that's councillors and officers, both active citizens happen to be directly involved in local government, to start getting involved in those sorts of things on a day-to-day basis. And you don't have the budget you have left is pointed primarily at very clear needs, adult social care, children's social care, very specific education. All of the spare money you had to try and make interesting things happen has gone away. But at a time when people are now connecting up and making interesting things happen for themselves. So your job is to join in as an equal with access to slightly different networks, sets of minds, and possibly resources from those people, I think.
No, that's enormously helpful. In some senses, it sort of links to a question about citizens' understanding of the role of the council. We've been engaging across the Kirklees with citizens, and it's continually come up as an issue that either people are unsure what the role of the council is, or that they're unaware almost entirely. how do you think we could possibly, the council could address that issue, that surfeit of knowledge about, well, what does a council do, and how can you then network as an enabler, as a facilitator?
They have to have a reason to be interested in you. So, thinking that it's probably a responsible thing for them to understand what a councillor does is not actually going to make them want to know. So my experience is that the best way to have somebody interested in you is to take an interest in them. So if you go and find out what somebody's doing and you tell the rest of the world what they're doing, eventually they start to be interested in what you're doing and what you're about. And if you do that consistently, you end up with a whole bunch of people who are civilly minded doing stuff, who also are starting to understand why you matter to them, why you're useful to them, or why they're potentially useful to you. And that's around really tangible, practical things. You know, there's this bloke who came and filmed me and stuck me on YouTube, didn't have a photograph of him in it, just was interested in me, and he told a couple of other people about what I was doing, and that was really interesting. Who's he? He's some councillor bloke. Well, what does he do? Actually, you know, and the next time it's sort of, and you just start with conversations about real, tangible things. Because, so it doesn't mean that I think we should give up on democracy as an idea and that people should believe that you should go out and vote for councillors, but wanting them to pay attention to a message, you could try and come up with a really sort of cool sort of like way of trying to get across the message of what a councillor does, but I suspect it will probably fall a little bit flat on its face. I genuinely think, I think, and maybe I don't know that I'm over-egging it, I just think that there is a real opportunity, particularly because people communicate so much and are free to communicate and are free to share what they experience and their social capital with their networks. So if they think that you've done an interesting thing, if you share something about them, they share it to their mates. And their mates then suddenly go, well, who is that person who's interested in you and why are they interested in you? And it starts to arouse questions. So people start to understand the value of a councillor in relationship to what they're trying to achieve, not in relationship to some nebulous notion. And I don't think democracy is nebulous, but some nebulous notion of there are certain core democratic values that we all have to understand.
Yes, that sounds familiar at a national level. Yes.
Yeah, quite possibly.
British values and all these things that sort of seem to essentialise the way in which democracy works in rather rigid, narrow ways.
Yeah, and it's I think it's better to the more you network, the more generous you are, the more you put yourself in that loop of generosity. Each resident becomes a little bit closer to you. You know, somebody knows you, and their nan might need to know you. You know, just that all of those relationships make everybody a little bit closer. And it also means that because they're based around quite everyday relationships rather than grand standing relationships, I think it actually becomes easier for you to have conversations along the lines of somebody comes to you and says, can you help us with this? And the answer is actually, I can't help you with that, but I can. I do happen to know somebody who works in the CCG and I can phone them or I can introduce you. And so actually being realistic about who you are and what you can achieve is easier because you're doing it on a smaller stage, you're doing it on a more human stage where there's already some element of trust. You all understand this because you're human beings. It's just, it's not quite how we've sort of lost, we don't quite configure a lot of our civic activity around councils in this way.
No, it's an interesting point. It's a point that's been raised with other stakeholders as well. And it kind of raises another set of questions, which is about decision making and about accountability and how do local councils interact with citizens around decision making outside of traditional election time and the sort of more typical ways in which they tend to interact. And I wonder whether you have any experience of good examples about the way in which you can bring local citizens into that process of decision making more effectively.
They're fairly modest things. So we did some work with a local authority in a particular ward, and very wisely the councillors had recognised that ward committees really were quite dysfunctional, and they have been quite dysfunctional for a long time. And we've also done some other work around packed police accountability meetings, which were also becoming dysfunctional in the same way. So, for example, around the ward committee meeting, there's one ward now, and they're working on it. This is patient stuff. They recognise that there are some decisions that the three councillors have to sit down and make together. But that's almost sort of become like the boring bit of the AGM, where they make those decisions. They make those decisions transparently. People can see that they've made those decisions, but they know that actually, in the end, it's the three of them who've got to either do something that's notionally rubber stamp or actually argue about something and decide it. That could be around things like, and that's often around financial issues or technical issues. The rest of what they do now is they work on sort of much more relaxed meetings, much more conversational times where they bring people together. They might sometimes bring them together around particular issues. They might sometimes take the conversation to particular places. And they essentially they call it sort of a district. What's the word they use? Not a district committee. It's but it's a much more relaxed, much more open, much more inclusive process. It moves much more, and it's not about people coming to the councillors who sit at a top table. And that's fairly simple stuff. There's also the officers, although not all of them, are starting to learn that. Minutes that they have a local blog, minutes go up there, agendas go up there, then they start sharing information up there. If I know that there's an opportunity over here, that goes up there. Likewise, that can happen on Facebook and Twitter. And really what they're trying to do, as I said, is work more closely to connect up the community. PAC meetings, they are, Steph, who works with me, runs what's called a hyperlocal blog, so it's like a community website. They live in a council estate with about 5,000 homes, and they've probably got close to 10,000 likes on their Facebook page now. So they've got 2 likes for effectively every household in their patch. So now they work really closely with local officers, whether it's the NHS, whether it's council, whether it's the police, to try and share information. And they've been live streaming police PAC meetings on their website and also on Facebook, and that reaches into many, many more homes, but also it starts to reach by proxy. So you start to, occasionally, this doesn't happen all the time, but you start to get things appearing saying, my nan's sitting next to me and she wants to know X.
Right.
So the conversation starts, just generally speaking, to become wider, and you get away from June, who comes every month and tells you about the dog in the pocket park, which you know is there and you try to do something about. And so you can really broaden the conversation. Another friend of mine who is doing some work in the Black Country, they have something that's equivalent to a small sort of community chest type pocket of money. And the local authority and some other bits of public services there are using that money now to back crowdfunding. So they're encouraging the community locally to decide what they want, to put up crowdfunding to see how much public support will come to that, and then they can put the money into that to support it and amplify it. So they're starting to use technology and relationships and people's individual pockets of social capital to see where there's the will to do something different, and then instead of this being a sort of political sludge fund or a grant or a grant making thing that we always give that money to those people, it starts to encourage enterprise, and it starts to get the council thinking slightly more entrepreneurially as well.
It takes it from just being a transactional relationship to something which is much wider. In that sense.
And there's almost it's not the solution to everything, because there's populism.
No.
Prove that there's a need. Well, I've got more mates than you. That doesn't prove that there isn't a need there. But it does start to change the councils. People looking to the council to fund a complete thing as well. That recognition that
they being the panacea to all ills, so to speak. That's a very interesting point.
One thing I'm aware of that we're involved in that I represent is we have a community forum that operates there, and the council there is one of many partners. I think being one of many is an important thing. So when we're doing information sharing, we do our this is going on, but then other organisations do the same as well. People don't expect decisions and votes necessarily to be coming from those meetings, but it gives them a sense of place, and it shows the councils being part of one of the partners, not the lead, but one of the partners in that. So I think there's a value in that, which is the informal sense of things, as opposed to well, it is a formal group really, but it feels more informal in those ways.
But that's useful to all citizens. That's the point. To you as a citizen, to the officer as a citizen, and to the resident as a citizen. The fact that they can find shared information is incredibly useful, and that's also why things like open data are powerful. It's not just that, and I think a lot of residents don't use it, to be fair, but it's the fact that the council officer now doesn't have to ripple around in the back end of an archaic system to fail to find a piece of information. They just go to the internet and there it sits, and they can start to do something with it. Likewise, the other public servants. So also this business of just getting in the habit of, if we know it, so should they, unless there's a very good reason why they shouldn't. Let's put it out there. Let's not even worry about what people are going to do with it. We don't know. We know that sometimes they'll use it to have a go at us, and other times they'll do very surprisingly wonderful things with it, and most of the time they'll do nothing with it. But it's easy to find, it's there, it's not causing us any harm. And so there's lots, so that instinct to trust, that instinct to share, that instinct to collaborate makes everybody's work easier. We did some work years ago, probably 2008, 2009, where we had neighbourhood managers, council officers paid neighbourhood managers when there was stacks of money there was money. And we showed them we trained them to set up their own local blogs and start sharing information in this way. Some of them really took to it. They were natural communicators, and others did it in very rigid ways, and others didn't understand why they were doing it. It's not always right that a council should be the source of that information. What the council should be doing is contributing to the overall civic conversation. And also, I think, and we've done work through social media surgeries to skill up active citizens alongside councillors and other public servants, and where they learn together, but also they learn from each other. So the physical business of learning networks them. The physical business of learning from each other starts to change the power relationships. But that means that they then start, when you teach them how to use the internet together, they go out into the real world and they start talking to each other on the internet, so they've got ready-made conversations.
You build those networks as you're learning.
And you learn together. And also, it's because you can see the whites of each other's eyes, all that issue about can I trust these people or not starts to soften. And so I think people start to communicate in more human ways. And the trivia of the internet is just as important as the grist. It is the oil that gets you the good stuff.
Trivia is humanising, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And the whole thing about often councils can put themselves up there as being somehow separate and not part
and above.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know lots of fantastic councillors who are really determined individual active citizens who do brilliant things, but there is still this perception, and there's this truth. There are also lots of councillors who are very aloof, and for them it's a badge of something. And
I can assure you not around this table. This whole question around mobile and digital technology and its opportunities and challenges in terms of the relationship between councils, councillors and citizens, but also as a participative tool, is one which is often framed in terms of either being the panacea to many of the problems of representative democracy, or in some ways being the solution to some of these very micro problems that you solve. And I just wonder, in some senses, what are the potential ways in which it can supplement what is traditional politics, what we already know exists within council, and what opportunities it offer which differ from that traditional politics?
Something like Government Digital Service has done some good work over the years, actually taking things that used to be bureaucratic and making them almost effortless. So taxing your car, stuff like that. So digital can, with some of those services, take a lot of the effort out of it. That saves you money, saves everybody time. It actually, oddly enough, I think it starts to change the relationship there, because if you go to a website and get a thing, It's almost like going to Amazon and buying a thing. The relationship, it's no longer a democratic relationship, it's just a service relationship, and you are just a good service provider. But I think it's daft to miss the opportunity to take some of that friction out of the system by just designing things well. That doesn't just involve digital design, that involves the design of the whole process that you're coming. So that's one thing that can save time, money, effort, and swearing, frankly. Which is really important, actually. The less you make your residents swear, unless it's around a policy thing,
The less that's buying,
I think the issue of whether, for example, we vote online or not, I don't actually know whether I've got an opinion. I have actually got an opinion about that. I'm just over 50. I like the idea, the ritual of going to a ballot thing. So I don't think that. I just like the ritual of going to a ballot. Yeah, I might be wrong about that. But that happens to be my opinion about it. So the other stuff again goes back to it can be very tempting to look at digital tools that say, here is your consultation tool, and there are good ones out there. But if you just go and get the tool, but you don't put the effort and the energy in to grow the number of civically minded people who are using the internet to have civic conversations, all you've got is a slightly slicker place where the same people have the same argument with each other. And also, I think that there is. I remember talking to somebody who just put up a consultation around, this is quite meta, but saying what data would you like us to release as open data? They put it up on a platform and it came to an end, and I said, why did that come to an end? And they said, well, we've got rules about consultation, they have to last for 3 months. And I said, so you don't want to know what data I want you to release now, do you? And he said, no, of course I do. And he just went back into the thing and put it up as an open-ended thing. So there's lots of, it's if you just take your traditional models of how you've always done things and why you consult and digitise them, all you've done is provided a sort of a super opportunity to the already engaged. So what you need to do is think about why you're consulting people, whether it's sincere, whether the questions make sense, what the language is, and also whether you are using digital tools to garner the opinions of people who are used to using the internet to talk about civic things. And if not, get out there, help them, find a way of helping them get involved, both in real world and both in the real world and online.
So how important is it that it's a two-way street? Because you consult, you end up with a lovely bank of information,
and they don't know what happened,
and your voters filled in the form and press the button and see.
And in the limited terms in which traditional consultation happens, I think that it's really important to start getting back to people and saying, I mean, it's not very interesting, but even saying thank you for your input, this is the report we wrote, and maybe even 6 months later, and this is the decision we made. Whoa, what a remarkable idea! But that's just tidying up. That's just tidying up the existing system. I think that broadly speaking, the knack is to understand how to replace consultation with an ongoing conversation, where at times you stop and you pause and you take a snapshot of thinking and you crystallise that into action and policy, and you tell people that that's what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's not easy. That's quite a complex process.
Unless a place exists where people periodically can express and involve themselves in this views.
Yeah, that if you have a view about something, that there is a place where you can put that. It is actually called the internet, and the way to find it is Google. But it could be. But to a certain extent, having a more organised way, I recognise that organisations work in certain ways, and having a more organised sense of we listen in consistent. We listen as we're hearing. We put it somewhere. I also think it's part of how councillors can work as well, because there's not much working out loud. There's not much, I'm not quite sure, this is what I think. My experience tells me this, what do you lot think? So you tend to come at us with fairly complete things, and with almost every consultation we sort of know what you want us to say.
Yes, because I was going to say, should we be replacing the word consultation with conversation?
That would be fantastic.
Because the one thing we hear all the time when we consult is, why are you consulting? You've already made the decision.
And organisations are organisations, and I reckon at least half the time that's also true. That you already know you've got only a limited number of choices. You know that politics means it sort of needs to be that one. It's got to be one hell of a consultation for it not to be.
Yeah, I mean, the West Yorkshire Transport Strategy, you look at it and you ask, what do you think of motherhood and apple pie? Is it a good idea?
Yeah.
Or is it a bad idea?
That's right. Yeah, that's
right. So you look go through all these questions,
Absolutely.
which are exactly like that.
Yeah, we consult on the budget. Would you like us to put your council tax up? And get a surprise, and the answer comes about no.
Yeah. The other thing is, sometimes you ask us about things that really don't matter, and then you ignore what we say. So there really should be a ship soon to be launched called Boaty McBoatface, because they asked us something that was utterly inconsequential. Yeah. We had an absolute laugh with it, and they should just go. And if when you ask us about something that doesn't matter, you then discard what we say, even if it was we were taking the mick. What are you going to do about anything that matters? So consultation is a very discredited thing, but it's really important that you are talking, that citizens in a place are talking about civic stuff and talking through you about civic stuff.
It sort of fills that gap between elections and all the things that we talked about originally in terms of this way we present what the council does and its impact.
But also it's a space where you can innovate. It's a space where ideas that don't exist in this place can start to emerge and can start to gain some credence here, and you can start talking about it, and you in committees or you with officers can't go, well, why can't we do it that way?
Yeah, but there's one very special moderator in all this, and that's party politics.
Yeah.
What do you think that party politics does to that conversation?
See, we can't start thinking outside the box, because it'll be something like, the Tories in Kirklees have decided they're going to do such and
or
such.
There's a U-turn. Actually, it's a bloody good idea. No, it's not. It's a U-turn. Yeah. That sort of party politics plays primarily to the traditional media model. Newspapers, headlines.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you are out and about in your community, taking an interest in people, I suspect that the conversations that start to emerge online will be much, much more human, because they know you as people. More of them know you as people. And when somebody says something blatantly slaggy off about you, and lots of people go, you're a fairly decent person, know that you're a fairly decent person, more of them will go, that doesn't sound like him to me, that's no bollocks. Or they won't share it. So I think that the attention that gets paid to all of those traditional media headlines is getting much less attention from the public than it used to be. However, we have recently had a referendum where I think that I'm probably wrong about that. So,
moving on.
I do think that, because a lot of the extremes are about headline chasing, and you need to deal with grey areas, and headlines like to turn them into black and white. So, as the headlines become less important, because the mainstream media becomes less important, the real newspapers are read most in places like this, not less and less out there.
Yeah. They're on blog sites and other discussions.
You can gradually, if you can wean yourself off worrying about that, I think that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, if you want to worry about it, you look at the Facebook page for the local paper, because that is full of the extreme end. Opinion. If you're driven by that, then you'll be.
You're not targeted at you.
But also, they're in a spiral. They've got a really nasty spiral to deal with, which is they've got to get clicks to sell advertising, which means they have to say more and more absurd things to get the clicks. And the things that they say, the headline increasingly doesn't relate to the content at the other end. But they're really desperate. So trying to disengage yourself from their desperateness and just having your own voice in your own in your own place where you can explore ideas is part of the future, I think.
Can I just ask a question on the media? We will be doing a session with some of the local media. These commercial pressures, which are seen to be encouraging more sort of dramatic, sensationalist reportage that often doesn't really drill into the essential features of the story. What does that mean for the way in which local authorities and local councils interact with that form of media? Do you think that it's, in some ways, it is possible to change the way in which they're practiced, or that these commercial pressures mean that this is a one-way journey, or that there is another way in which this can be approached, at which you bring the local media into a wider network of public information provision?
Yeah. Broadly speaking, the latter, but the commercial organisation. So I've often thought that those people who are paid by public money to create information for the public ought to be working to fairly consistent standards. So that means whether it's a journalist at the BBC or a communications officer at Kirklees Council, there should be this is public money being used to create information for public benefit. There should be a consistent understanding of why we're doing it and what we're about. And in that, so at the moment we've got things like impartiality, which I think is a bit of a tricky one. There should be things like fairness. How do we know whether somebody's being fair? Well, it's openness, it's transparency, show you're working. And a lot of the relationships between councillors and also councils and the media is about a transaction. It's deal making around stories half the time. We'll give you an exclusive if that suddenly ends up on page 7 or doesn't end up in at all. That stuff can only happen if you're not being transparent. So my other advice to councillors repeatedly has been, put your information out there first. If a journalist puts in an FOI request, stick the FOI request on your website, stick the answer on your website, send them an email with a link to say it's there. They think they're getting a scoop, but everybody else, it's no longer a story. People know, and they can see what you've said. So when they twist it and distort it, you just point the public at what you said, and the public reads it and goes, "Oh, okay, no, that seems fairly reasonable to me." But you're still playing a dance with the media around private information. It's almost, you're still locked in the world of limited bandwidth, where actually you're in a world of unlimited bandwidth.
No,
so
that's a very interesting suggestion.
Excuse me. Yesterday morning, there was an item on Radio 5 breakfast programme, and it was running had been banned in a primary school playground.
Right.
So they had their head teacher on, and of course they were coming at it from the angle, this is health and safety gone mad, you can't do concourse without masks, etc, etc.
Yeah.
And that teacher said, just hang on a minute, what we've actually done is we've set aside certain areas that if children want to sit and read a book, they can sit and read a book, or they can do something else in another area, and we've got other areas where they can play football. Then what we've said is, don't run through a quiet area and disturb the people that were reading books.
Here, just pay it, just show a bit of respect.
Right.
Yeah.
Thing finishes, and of course, Radio 5 is bombarded with texts from listeners saying, what are you on that for? It's a non-story.
Yeah.
Illustrates exactly what.
Yeah. And the thing about it, because the thing is, if you don't put stuff up there, even when somebody 5 years later is Googling to find out what the truth is, they can't find it.
Yeah.
So if you are spending money creating public information, as long as it's not private information, you should think seriously about the fact that let's just put it there, so that it can be found.
And the facts will speak for themselves in many senses.
Yeah, they will, and it also helps you run your organisation, because it's easier for you to find out more about stuff as well, and you don't have to ring officers to say what's going on here, what's this about. There's the information, and I think that's even to the extent of, I'm not saying that you put together, if somebody's drafting a speech, you would put the 5 or 6 drafts up, the rough work. But if an officer is combining 4 or 5 pieces of information into something that's constructed, you still make sure that the core information that it sits on is also publicly available.
Yeah, so it gives it a sort of foundation which is often absent.
So your response to the media is, we are open, transparent, we act with integrity against these communications rules. You can say what you like about us. We are going to play the long game of building trust with the public. It's up to you what you do.
it might avoid some of the more outrageous claims sometimes that some politicians also make as well. If they have to think in a different way.
And how would you have reacted when you were on the other side of the fence and somebody said that to you when you were the journalist?
When I was a journalist, well, no, you're right. I mean, when we talk about the culture of newsrooms is changing. But when we talk about the culture of councillors, there's a very strong culture in newsrooms, and it's competitive, and it is about exclusives, and it is about relationships. But they can't. It's that world is still changing. You know that they are living in changing times, just as you are living in changing times. So just because they want it to be the way it was, and they want to be able to behave as if it once was like that, some of them will get cross.
Getting in first is for public bodies is the most important thing.
Or being proactive.
Well, I think it is. I mean, we've got an issue here at the moment with a waste site which is out of control. It's the council's got a role with the Environment Agency to sort it out, but some people are blaming the council because and wrongly so, really, because the council has not been communicating properly about what it's been doing. It didn't get in first. If it got in first, it could have been the champion who was sorting out the issue, who was working with the community to help people, and instead it's being blamed.
It kind of opens up a wider question. Sorry.
No. There's a blogging habit, which is if you know it, share it now. So if you have an idea, pop it up there. Even a half-formed idea. If you've done a thing, say it. And part of the beauty of that is if a year later that becomes part of a bigger idea, or it becomes very important, you can point to the fact that even at the time we said that this is what we were doing. We haven't waited to pull the story together for you to believe that really 12 months ago we were. You've shared your working as you're doing it. And this also relates to not just how councillors use the internet to communicate, and councillors as independent citizens can use the internet however they choose to communicate, but also how council officers are given the permission and the support to communicate their work and what it means and what they're doing and where they are and what they're doing and the implications for that. But I think the idea of being more relaxed, more open, and allowing officers to share more also helps demonstrate the activity that's going on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I think it links to another aspect of our inquiry about this role of mobile digital technology and the way in which it affects councillors' relationship. If councillors' role is changing to becoming more enablers, more facilitators, networkers, and those sort of questions, it does raise questions about how does this affect their function as leaders and showing leadership in communities. And I just wonder whether you have any thoughts about how digital and social media could help enhance that leadership role as well as the more discursive, deliberative approach. And have you got any examples of where maybe you've seen that leadership role through new technologies?
Well, I'm really going to restrict. I mean, the people I'm drawn to are the ones who do use the fact that they've got a mobile phone to talk a lot about the people they're meeting and the things they're doing, and to praise people, to acknowledge their other accomplishments, and in doing that, they're doing two things. They're showing us where they are. So, whether they might be at a meeting with the Prime Minister and they're telling us, or they might be at a meeting with Mrs. Miggins, and it's important that we know that they're at both. And in terms of their clout as a leader, what Mrs. Miggins is essential, because without understanding Mrs. Miggins, you're pointless. But the fact that they've got access to the Prime Minister is also part of their milieu, if you know what I mean. But what they are in the habit of being open about who they are, where they're going, what they're doing. They're not in the habit of claiming credit, they're in the habit of giving credit. They're in the habit of sharing other people's ideas because they're interesting, but they do also take time to stop and think and put that together into something coherent so that they can express who they are, what they're about and what they believe in. And it's messy, but it's a patient, quite human, long-term process, and it is made entirely possible by this. I mean, it used to be you could do it with a laptop, but with a laptop it was a much more deliberate process. Yeah. With this, it's just routine sharing. But again, that goes back. I'm not really saying anything different, and I think that I think that the heroic leader can be undermined by the leadership of a network quite easily. Is the heroic leader tends to need to be something that they probably aren't. They need to create recognition. And also to create an image that they probably can't live up to. Whereas the network leader is actually probably showing as they go along some of their weaknesses or some of their mores, particular mores or their personalities traits. So they're already allowed to be human. So when they falter and fall, they fall onto a network of support. Whereas the heroic leader just goes snap. And so it doesn't mean that I don't think we still need people who are really good at standing up and talking and taking us a place and being brave and taking us somewhere. So it doesn't mean that there isn't place for something that resembles heroic leadership, but that's very few of us.
It's heroic leadership in terms of a different narrative.
Well, it's sometimes context, yes, but also sometimes it's this person's job because they're the right person at the right time to say the right things. But the rest of the time they can be a networked, flawed leader.
It speaks to a wider conversation about politicians being criticised and political parties for over-promising, under-delivering, and this sort of normalising of expectations. It's also the normalising of the role of the council in some sense.
And also revealing the fact that just because you haven't managed to nail the big thing that you promised and it's going to happen 18 months later than you said, you've actually done 1,000,001 small things. You've met people, you've helped in all sorts of different ways. And surfacing that is also makes that's part of your greater contribution. It's lots of small things, but they often amount to everything you achieve because the big things turn out to be a pain in the bum. And if they were easy to solve, we would have solved them 2 councils ago.
I think it's sort of interesting because it's sort of breaking down both the role of policy making and policy implementation as well. So it gives it a more critical teleological stretch to it, and so you're giving the public more opportunities to engage, interact, and feel part of that process.
Just a point about the praising others, all those sort of things. Isn't that in many ways, aren't you saying that we're not the only leaders? There are leaders right the way throughout the community, and so you are. Everybody can be a leader. It's just a matter of that you are the one who's conveying that and showing that's around.
And also, when you do that, you leave behind a little bit of goodwill. So when you've done something interesting, all those people will praise you. And that's it isn't cynical. It's a very human thing. But it's much better that people's appreciation of what you're doing or trying to do comes from below, rather than some distorted headline in a newspaper that didn't really quite get the gist of what you were about.
It's the decency of acknowledgement, isn't it?
That's a lovely way of putting it.
Just think about it in terms of synchronisation, because obviously the social mobile technologies offer platforms to do politics, same politics and new politics, if you want to put it in those terms. There is also traditional politics. It is meetings. It is doorsteps. It is that sort of in your experience, how successful are adopters at meshing those two and synchronising them so that not only do they fit, but also in terms of workload management and all these other questions that possibly could raise, these are managed in an appropriate way?
I don't know how expert I am at that, really only from observing. So I think that if you're not in the habit of sharing a lot, when you come to election time, everyone can see from your Facebook page that there's an election on. Because suddenly there's loads of pictures of you with people standing in front of things wearing shiny jackets.
And you only go on Facebook when you want our vote.
Yeah, exactly. You only knock on the door when you want to vote. And the beautiful thing about Facebook and Twitter is people can block you. So when you're doing that, they can ignore you knocking on the door, but the chances are they'll open it. So it goes back to your insincerity is even more apparent on social media. And there are I've seen politicians with accounts that were set up 4 years and 3 months ago, were busy for 3 months,
And
then they come back to life again.
Yeah.
Because somewhere in the common strategy is. So I think, again, I think that those, on an individual level, those things aren't mushing together very well at the moment. Except for those, there are a couple of councillors locally to me in Birmingham who communicate all the time, fairly consistently, and when it is election time, you barely notice the difference, other than they're saying there's an election on and I really want you to go out and vote.
Yeah.
They sort of don't need to make the argument because they've made it. What they do start doing is a slightly more benign thing, which is saying let's use our democracy, let's vote, because they believe that they've done everything they can do consistently to get to the point where I know whether you're going to vote for me or not. I can't persuade you now.
The deal's being done over a long period.
That's
interesting.
So they're not, because it goes back to the one thing we tune out more and more is people going me on social media. It's about me. It's about me. It's about me. And that's the habit of politicians every election time. Not entirely, but that's broadly the habit. It is about me. Vote me, please. And we just tune that stuff out. We've all got enough needy friends that we really don't want to be watching on Facebook without adding a needy remote councillor. So
other councillors are available.
So, however, having said that, I'm quite certain, and I'm not privy to it, that political parties have very sophisticated understandings of how they can use social media to get messages across. I don't know how well those, at national level that would be the case. They may well already be communicating at national level to local level to say, can you retweet these messages for us, that sort of stuff. Yeah, that happens. I don't suspect there's any great coordination at a local government campaign level yet. I suspect that will come. But again, you have to be really careful that you're not just ramming a demand for attention down somebody's throat.
Just to take that on, and one of the issues that the Democracy Commission has been looking at is not only the role of councillors, but also possibly changing the profile of councillors. And we can put it rather crudely in how do we bring the next generation of councillors through. And in many ways, social and mobile technologies offer potential to reach out to possibly new councillors from different backgrounds. And I just wonder, in your own experiences from Podnosh, whether you've seen any examples of the way in which social media has been able to bring in new councillors from different parts of society, and how.
In Birmingham we've got a handful of young, very committed councillors who are relatively new, and they do, without fail, they do two things. They use social media well, and they advocate for others, and they take an interest in other people, and they sort of can't help them. It's part of their makeup. They can't help themselves doing that.
They know they're different.
They've actually grown up to some of the youngest will have grown up in a world where those loops are naturally happening to them, and they understand this business of demanding too much attention of me, and sharing is an important part of how they function online. Now, I think they've become councillors. I don't know. They've obviously individually they've been able to get over the issue of I have a commitment to a political party, because I think the political parties are a real barrier to active citizens out there making things happen in their community, using the internet to make that work, then being asked to buy into, but I'm an independent active citizen, but to become a councillor, broadly speaking, the most efficient way to do that is to become part of a party machine. So they've obviously decided that they're comfortable with that and okay with that, which is legit. I think the big issue is there are lots of people out there doing civic stuff. Quite a lot of them, people I know, who are doing an awful lot of independent civic stuff, might become councillors, but they don't want to become involved in a party political system.
And sometimes square pegs are put in round holes.
Yeah.
And people who are not suited perhaps to that political party, find themselves.
Yeah.
You come across votes every now and again.
Yeah, and what the parties are often looking for when they're looking online for active citizens is, you've got a lot of followers, you are good at this, you can connect. We need that because we're rubbish at it. How do we draw you to us, rather than leaving you as an independent active citizen, sort of doing stuff that we're not able to lay claim to or badge. So I think that at the moment it is an opportunity because people can be seen more easily, so the parties can find them more easily because they can see their activity. So that's potentially a good thing, but I don't know, as you're saying, the fitting together of the party and the digitally mobile as well as civically mobile active citizen fits very well.
I think the parties are okay. I think it's if you turn down the tribalism, and because the tribalism by its nature will be negative, and as such that will turn people off. And so, of course, you will criticise others. You will, you every now and again, something will wind you up, and you'll press the button, and I don't know about regret it later, but you think, well, what exactly was the point of that? But generally, if you're looking at communication with people, turning down the tribalism, talking positively about what you're about, is more likely to.
And also what they're about, what others are about.
Where do you see the future of mobile and digital technology in terms of its impact on and reshaping of not just local democracy, but politics more widely? Are there any things that you see in the future which maybe the council should be thinking during the Democracy Commission they should be looking ahead to and maybe embracing? It's a horrible question.
It is. It's because there's so much change coming. Even the way we move around places, who owns things, all of that is changing, and that will change all politics. Things like who owns cars, who owns roads, who owns buildings, whether we need buses, whether just everything is changing. And I suspect when big things change, we must have, we went through this in the 19th century. Our democracy was no longer fit for what the Industrial Revolution did to us, and we had to go through quite a painful process of change. I don't know what they are. I suspect they're going to be inevitable. I think that elected politicians, if we had, and this is really quite a short-term thing, I think, but the fact that some of the things we've been talking about, which is there are people who are able to connect up and make things happen. They want to find other people to help them to do that. They want those things they want to do those things. They might want help from people. They might occasionally want some support from the system. Actually having maybe bigger wards with fewer councillors, where actually what you're trying to do is nurture that in your place, and you're using all sorts of technology to do that, and what you're concerned about is the quality of the place and the quality of people's lives in that place. And your job is to primarily do that. I think that digital technology makes that much easier for fewer numbers of politicians, possibly with some extra actual officer support. But that is a different type of democracy. It is about, we're not interested in trying to lay claim to any of this or suck it into the party or suck it into the machine. We just want to allow it to happen and to grow it. And you can actually do that because you can connect up and you can share easily. But that's no different from what I'm saying. So the short answer to your question is, I don't know.
No, it's just a question I've been mulling over myself, to sort of think that, if we go 10 years, past, I don't think 10 years ago we would have perceived quite where we are now. I think that transfer from that to that has been very interesting, from laptop to phone. And you wonder where it'll go next.
You really do. So there's two things that I've talked about, thinking about it a little bit more. So at Not Westminster, we talked quite a lot about officers being human, and as more and more of the jobs that used to be part of the bureaucracy are robotised, we may well get to the point where the point of a human being doing a job is empathy, which is not very deep in the DNA of bureaucracy.
Interesting, yeah.
So council officers, if they're people, their greatest skill will be their humanity. So that's one thinking that might, I think the rush to everything being a robot is probably going to be much slower than we think, but nevertheless. Then the other thing that gets talked about quite a lot, but is at the moment a flawed technology, but might be less so, is the technology behind Bitcoin. So there's behind Bitcoin is something called a distributed ledger, which means that when somebody gives a Bitcoin to somebody else, the entire ledger is updated simultaneously everywhere, so everybody knows where all the money is all the time. Now that sort of process could replace a planning department. It could even replace a planning committee, because what it's doing is it's looking to create a substitute for trust. And one thing a local authority is its job is to be a trusted civic institution, and the things that it does, like keep records for us, deal with disputes, if those can be codified and put into a ledger, they can happen in a networked way. So that does leave the issue of a democratic leader. The planning committee no longer needs to decide whether that was, and I'm sure that the planning committee does less of this, whether that is permitted or not, because the rules are fairly clear and the ledger decides that. So the planning committee needs to decide whether this area of the place, needs to decide the nature of places, the type of places, the style of places, whatever.
It's more about evaluation and technical.
And that's actually that's what councillors should be doing more of anyway. Less of the bureaucratic decision making, and more of the what do we believe in and what are our values and
so, bureaucracy, which you could robotise, I guess sometimes comes up with, and we refer things to planning committee a lot of the time. I've referred 5 things to planning committee recently, not all have ended up there, but that's where some of those things have been, where if it was robotised, it would be automatically passed.
Yeah.
And so it's the intervention from a councillor which is the bit which stops the machine.
Yeah. Yes. And I think we're going to find that sometimes systems will go too far and we have to learn to roll them back, and other times we'll be not letting the system do as much as it could to help us.
Well, we're just coming to the end of our time, and unless
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. It was interesting. You started off by talking about this notion of unlocking relationships, and I think in many ways what you've talked about has given us plenty of food for thought about what we define by those relationships and how we then unlock them. And in some ways, not only the opportunities of digital and social medias, but also their constraints in some ways, which I think is often not something which is recognised in a lot of these conversations. They are not the panacea to all the ills of what we're looking at, but at the same time they can certainly help us in finding some of the solutions or moving towards some of the solutions, some of the issues that we have. The way in which the Democracy Commission goes forward from here is that we're taking evidence until the end of October. We then go away and we're going to consider the evidence that we've got. Carl's going to lock us away until we come out with some recommendations. One of the things we're very, very aware of is that often these kind of commissions extract ideas, enthusiasm, information from people who kind of give their time and then don't really interact with them again, and then a report comes out. We're very keen to avoid that. And so when we have come to that draft form of a report, we'd like to come back to you. We're going to go back to all those citizens across Kirklees and outside who've given their time. And 2 reasons. One is to make sure that we've captured your thoughts and your ideas and your input accurately in a way that you're happy with. But also, secondly, we'd like you to give us a bit of a soundboarding on some of the ideas that are coming up. We think it's an essential part of that. It's sometimes the case that you sort of come to some conclusions, and the people who've taken part in the process saying, where did I come in? It's quite clear that there's no input on that. We then go in the new year to report to full council. We're also going to be engaging on a local, regional and national level with the report. And this is the start in many ways. One of the things that actually I think Kirklees should be congratulated with is they don't see the Democracy Commission simply as a piece of work in
and it's not
itself.
just about Kirklees, is it?
And it's not just about Kirklees, and I think that's a very important point. And I think working with Carl and the team from Nottingham Westminster is that constantly continuing that conversation. And it'll be great when we come together in February for the Nottingham Westminster to start thinking about how we can take some of the ideas that you've talked about and what's coming out of the Commission forward and think about development in the future. And I think that it's clear that there are a lot of opportunities there by what you've talked about today. But on behalf of all the officers in the Commission who's here, thank you very much, A, for your time, and also for your enthusiasm. We're deeply grateful for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.